What's up, everybody? Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we are going to be doing our running back rankings for the 2025 fantasy football draft. We will go through 75 different running backs. I will give you my tiers in terms of which ones that I like, which ones I think have good value in the draft and are sleepers, which ones could be potential bust. And the purpose of this is to help you set up your running back depth for success so that you win your fantasy football championship this season. If you have any questions, please comment in the comments section. I reply to all my commenters, so please take advantage of that with this small channel. And like and subscribe to the channel if you want to see a wide variety of fantasy football content, as well as other information that you can check out in the description below. Alright, so before we get into our running back rankings, I first want to discuss my running back strategy and philosophy in terms of team building and setting up my fantasy football team for success at the running back position. Generally, when it comes to drafting running backs, I'm generally trying to get a good one if I can in the first 4 rounds, preferably 2 if possible. But when it gets down to the 6th round, I generally find myself a little more heavy on receivers at that point than running backs, because I'm trying to get good pass-catching receivers that have a lot of volume, as I've talked about previously in my videos. But I do want to make sure I have a lot of running back depth on my team. I think there's a lot of great value in running backs that you can find later in the draft that I will discuss in this video. But as a general overview, regardless of when I take running backs, my key philosophy in fantasy football is to have as many running backs as I can to build depth. Ideally, I like to have at least 6 running backs, preferably 7 to 8 running backs if I can have enough roster spots to hold that many, because it is the most oft injured position in fantasy football, and because of that, you have to plan accordingly in case your top guys go down. And because of that, that's why I'm going to be going through 75 running backs in this video to talk where there is potential value in fantasy football this season among a lot of different running backs. Also, as a heads up, this is geared more towards PPR formats than standard or half PPR, but a lot of these rankings, I believe, are pretty comparable to all 3 scoring systems, that is, because I'm looking at these running backs in terms of opportunity and role on their team, and whether that comes via pass catching or via touchdowns. I generally think that they're pretty consistent despite a little bit of minor fluctuation that you may see if you're looking at a standard versus a PPR running back. If you have any questions about how I feel about certain players that you're on the fence about in different formats other than PPR, just comment below and I'm happy to help you. Alright, so now we will look at our rankings. Just a quick orientation to the graph. It's very similar to what I've shown in previous videos where I rank them both on my personal rankings, also in comparison to the consensus ADP of where users are drafting them, and how fantasy football experts rank them on average. So the far left column, my rank, that is how I rank them personally. I have the player name, team, buy, etc. Pretty self-explanatory. The consensus rank is what the general fantasy football expert ranks each of these running backs as. The average round is the average round in which they are going. So, for example, Saquon Barkley up there at the top, he's on average going with the 3rd pick in the 1st round. This is geared towards a 10-team league. So that's basically what the average round is basically saying, is where they're on average getting drafted by the average user. The ADP comparison, though, is looking at if you take how I personally rank the running backs and then you reorganize how I think all the running backs will finish based on the order in which each one got drafted, where there is potential value. So, for example, you can't really see this too much with the early guys because they're all generally going around the 1st, 2nd round. But the biggest example I could see is Omarion Hampton down there at 11. I will go into why I have him highlighted in green, which means I think there is good value. But essentially, you notice his average round is 5.1, so on average the 1st pick in the 5th round. But I think the actual value that he's giving based on how I would reorder the running backs is around the 4th pick in the 3rd round. So because he has at least a increase of a round in which he should be going higher, he's highlighted in green. You'll notice the opposite if they go a round later than where I'm projecting them, those players will be highlighted in red. And additionally, on the right-hand columns, I have each of the fantasy football expert columns in terms of how they're ranking them: ESPN Sleeper, NFL Network, Real Time Fantasy Sports, and Fantrax, and as well as the average for that. So that is the orientation to this graph. And first of all, I'm going to start up at the top. All these individuals are highlighted in blue because I think they are all great value for first-round running backs, and I want to highlight who I think will be the top 12 running backs for fantasy, because that will dictate some of my players later on in the draft that I will discuss a little bit later. But we start with our first tier in this video, and that is the elite tier. These are 3 running backs, in my opinion, that there's only one player that I'm taking over these 3, and that is Jamar Chase. If any of these other 3 running backs are on the board, I would be taking one of them because I think they all give you excellent value for fantasy. And in order of how I have them ranked: Saquon Barkley, number 1, Bijan Robinson, number 2, Jahmyr Gibbs, number 3. All these running backs I really like because they're all workhorses on their team. Even Gibbs, with the presence of Montgomery, is still very heavily involved in the offense, especially as a pass-catching running back as well. But all 3 of these guys, explosive athletes, very productive history and pedigree in the league. They're all still relatively at an age where I predict that they'll still be very effective in 2025. I personally, I could go on with this for quite a while, but for the interest of this video and timeliness, I have Saquon Barkley ranked number 1 because I believe that Philadelphia Eagles offense is one of the best in the NFL. They're essentially running it back from last season, and Saquon, there's a little bit of concern about his age and about if he's going to be able to replicate the type of season that he had last year. But for me personally, I'm not really worried about that. The bottom line is that he is the most explosive running back talent in the NFL, and he's on the best offense. So as much as I like Robinson and Gibbs, I think that the Philadelphia Eagles offense and the amount of touches that he's going to be getting throughout the season puts Saquon Barkley clearly at the top for me. Bijan Robinson and Gibbs I both really like. I went with Robinson over Gibbs, though, because I know that Robinson will be getting more of a work share of the carry versus Jahmyr Gibbs, who's probably going to be getting, maybe 60 to 70% if you're wishful thinking, but David Montgomery is still going to be involved as well. So all 3 of them are great, and as I've said, that those are essentially 2, 3, and 4 on my board. Jamar Chase would be number 1 for me, and then Justin Jefferson would slide right in there after Jahmyr Gibbs as my top 5 of players that I have on my draft board. The next tier here is we have the OGs. So these guys have been around the league for quite a bit. A lot of concerns about their age or injury history in the case of Christian McCaffrey. And they are Christian McCaffrey and Derrick Henry. These guys have been around the league for quite a while, and I think the biggest knock on them is their age, if they are declining. And if you're looking at this in terms of a redraft league, I am not concerned about Christian McCaffrey and Derrick Henry declining, because the bottom line is that they have so much upside and so much potential that, especially with those offenses, that I would rather take the chance on having one of those 2 on my team and them having a breakout year versus letting them slide to somebody else and regretting it later. I think you can make the argument in Dynasty you can drop these guys down a tier for the 2 running backs that I'll be talking about next. But I love Christian McCaffrey, especially because of the issues with the receiving cores going on in San Francisco. They really don't have any healthy receivers right now, aside from George Kittle as a pass-catching option. They have Pearsall, who we hope he can stay healthy, but he hasn't really shown that so far in his career. The only other guy that's really healthy right now is Demarcus Robinson, who has not been a consistent NFL wide receiver during his time in the league. So I think because of that, you're going to see quite a bit of pass-catching volume going to McCaffrey. They also have running back injuries behind him as well to speak on. So because of that, I think this is all setting up well for McCaffrey to be a workhorse back once again. And if he stays healthy, he had an excellent 2023 season where he was essentially a cheat code in fantasy football. I would love to take the chance to see if he can do that again, despite the down year last year. And then Derrick Henry, very much the same thing. This guy is, I think he's at the age where typically running backs would tail off, but Derrick Henry is really just kind of a beast of his own in terms of one of the few guys that seems to be able to sustain fantasy success despite the workload. And he's on an awesome offense with the Baltimore Ravens. He should get plenty of opportunities to score big again on an excellent offensive scheme. I'm not worried about Derrick Henry. And to me, he rounds out the top 5 running backs that I'd like to have in fantasy in this second tier. The next two are the high upside swings in tier 3. And these two players to me are a little bit younger. I would probably put them in Dynasty over the OG tier guys that I just talked about. And they are number 6, Ashton Jeanty, and number 7, Devon Achane. To me, both of these guys are very good running backs to have in fantasy. At this point, though, in the draft, I would generally be trying to prefer some of the other receivers that are probably available around their range, such as Amon-Ra St. Brown, Justin Jefferson if he happens to fall, guys like that. I would maybe Nico Collins potentially as well. I think that at this point I would generally be trying to get more of that elite pass catching option over these running backs at this point. But I think Jeanty and Achane both have incredible upside, and there's a real argument that they could be league-winning running backs this year. At this point, I kind of went a little bit back and forward on which one to put at 6 and which one to put at 7. There was news today that Achane has a soft tissue injury, which is kind of the reason why I have him a little bit lower than Jeanty on this list. Ultimately, because the coaching staff doesn't seem to be concerned about it in Miami. I'm not really concerned about it myself at this time, but I do think it's something to monitor moving forward, especially because he does have an injury history and has been injured quite often throughout his career. Jeanty I really like. I just need to I think it's a little bit risky to take a first-round rookie running back in the first round, but it really could reap great dividends, especially if he can replicate the same success that he had in college. This next tier, number 4, is the great value tier. And this is honestly the group that I find myself drafting one of these 5 running backs the most, because I think that in general, all of them are going in the late 2nd to 4th round on average. They all give you upside of a potential number 1 running back, and I have them all in my top 12 as guys that I've generally been trying to target if I get wide receivers in the first round, and then trying to get one of these guys in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th round. And they are in order: number 8, Josh Jacobs; number 9, Chase Brown; number 10, James Cook; number 11, Amarian Hampton; and number 12, Alvin Kamara. So I have Jacobs 1. I talked about him a little bit in the video that I did on mock drafts, but I really like Jacobs' involvement in the Green Bay offense. I think that he's pretty much the clear number 1 back, should get the majority of touches. They were very effective running the ball, and especially late in the season when it's going to be cold, they're going to be relying on him even more. Josh Jacobs, to me, is one of the best running backs that you can have, and I love the fact that he's going pretty late into the late 2nd round. He's a good first running back to have if you went receiver in round 1. Chase Brown, I really love for fantasy this season, especially for PPR formats. He is on average going in the late 3rd round, but I think he really does give you a value of somebody that is a early 3rd round pick. I have him at number 9. Keep in mind, this guy was a top 10 back last season after Zach Moss got injured, and he became the full-time back in Cincinnati. So I think there's a good chance that he can continue that moving forward and have a very underrated fantasy season this year. James Cook, now that he's back and signed, I think that he again is set up for success. This offense again doesn't, much like McCaffrey, they don't really have receivers that are really stepping up into an elite void. You can make the argument that Keon Coleman could be the one to do that, but they lost Mac Hollins. I think that there's a good chance that they are going to rely on James Cook a lot for some receptions in the backfield, and he's going to be very valuable too. And then Amarian Hampton and Alvin Kamara, I have these guys highlighted in green because I think they give you 3rd round value for guys that are going in the late 4th, early 5th even. I don't think that Hampton's ADP is going to stay at that, especially because of Najee Harris's eye condition that he has going on from the accident. I like Hampton a little bit more than Kamara because of the age and the opportunity on what I think is going to be a better team with the Los Angeles Chargers. But I love Kamara as well because, again, this team does not have a lot of options. So I think Kamara is going to be heavily involved on the Saints. You don't love the fact that this team is probably going to be one of the bottom 5 teams in the NFL this year, but Kamara is going to be heavily involved. And in a league, especially with PPR, where its volume is how you score a lot of points with receptions, I think Kamara will be giving you a lot in that department. All right, so now we go to our next tier. This is now getting into what you technically call the RB2 range outside the top 12. And that is, this group is what I call the risky value group. So we have the great value and now we have the risky value group. And they are in this order: Bucky Irving, Jonathan Taylor, Kyren Williams, James Conner, Breece Hall, and Chuba Hubbard. So I rank them all in terms of the order in which I think they will perform this season, how good they will be. All these guys are going in the 3rd to 5th round, but I think have some concerning value that I've generally been bypassing them. Unless they happen to slip, I've generally been trying to go with the other guys in the 4th tier that I've talked earlier, the great value tier. Bucky Irving, I like, but I am concerned about his frame. Will the Liam Cohen effect hurt him with him leaving the team? And then you still have Rachaad White and Sean Tucker there, who are both productive at times as well. So is this new offensive coordinator going to give Bucky the number of opportunities that he had with Tampa in the previous regime? I'm not really sure. So I do like him, but I think that he falls a little bit lower to me than those other guys that I mentioned in the great value tier. Jonathan Taylor, I'm not really a fan of, 1, from an injury perspective, and 2, because I think that his ADP is a little bit higher than I actually project he will go. I think this Colts offense is going to be kind of a mess with that quarterback situation, and I think, unfortunately, it's going to hurt Jonathan Taylor's value. Very similarly with the Los Angeles Rams, their quarterback situation concerns me a lot with Kyren Williams. So I think he's going to, and he got a lot of touchdowns last season, which of course is great, but can he replicate that to give him the same amount of fantasy success that he had last season? So because of that, he's number 15 for me. So not quite the value that you would like for somebody that's going in the 3rd round. I think he's really actually giving you mid-4th round value. James Conner is somebody that I don't really love necessarily, but I do like the fact that he is one of the Cardinals running backs that I think should clearly get a lot of the workload in this offense. They didn't really bring in anybody that I think is going to significantly threaten his touches unless he just loses it himself by just not being productive in the offense as he continues to age. I do think James Conner is a RB2 though, and I do like the fact that he is falling into the 5th round as a guy that you can try to swoop up. He's not bad value for where he's going. Next is Breece Hall to me, and this is a tough one because Breece Hall was really highly rated last season in the pre-draft process. He had a pretty good 2023 season as well, but kind of tailed off last year. And I think the presence of Braylon Allen as well as the Aaron Rodgers issues from the year before kind of hurt Breece Hall's value. And now we're kind of looking at the situation as maybe more of a handcuff timeshare than we expected. So because of that, I don't really have Breece Hall ranked as highly as the consensus does, and I think that if anything, I would be trying to prefer other running backs in his range like Chase Brown, James Cook, Hampton, etc. All those guys I would rather have right now than Breece Hall. But I will caveat and say that he does have immense talent, and I do think he could have a good fantasy season, but I am concerned about, 1, the presence of Justin Fields, who runs the ball, Braylon Allen being successful, what this new offensive scheme will look like. All of those are question marks that pushes Breece Hall out of the top 15 for me. And then Chuba Hubbard, a very underrated development that I think could really hurt Chuba Hubbard is Rico Dowdle being signed on this team. And this is after Chuba Hubbard had the type of season that he did. They brought in another 1,000-yard rusher in Rico Dowdle from Dallas. So could this be a sign that they're trying to run a 2 running back scheme and that could potentially result in them hurting each other? It's definitely possible. I do think Chuba Hubbard is a great back to have in fantasy. And he's going at a fair range given his ADP. So that being said, I still like him as a top 20 back, but he's not as high to me as some of these other guys because of that potential issue. This next group is the rookie wild card, and there's only one rookie that I have in this group, and he has shot up the draft boards for a lot of people. It is Travion Henderson of the New England Patriots. So this guy, he previously running back at Ohio State, championship Ohio State team that won the title in January. This guy, I think there was a lot of question marks early of just what his involvement would be with Ramondre Stevenson, but so far in preseason he has looked excellent, and he got another touchdown this weekend. I think that this one is a real wild card to me though, because I would prefer to have his upside and what he could be over this next group of veterans. David Montgomery is the next on the list. I think Montgomery is somebody that I generally like to have for fantasy because he's consistent and you know what you get with him. But Henderson could give you that league-winning upside as a pick that is generally going in the 5th or 6th round. I'm not really sure if you can get that from David Montgomery unless Gibbs gets injured. But at the same time, I don't think Henderson is quite to the level of the Breece Hall, Chuba Hubbard guys where, he's going to perform up there with them, because ultimately this is still a timeshare with Ramondre Stevenson until he snatches it away from him. So I think that this guy, there's a lot of ways you could take this. I really like him, and I think that he's going to be a great running back for fantasy, but I think that it's going to happen in the second half of the season. So I have him as a wild card that could really swing either direction, in my opinion. So the best place I thought you could put him is right on the edge of the number 20 running back at number 19, between two groups of guys, because there's a lot of outcomes here. The next group is the underrated veterans. So this is the 7th tier of guys. There are a total of 7 running backs that I like here that I think are very underrated, and the thing I like about them is that they're all going 6th round or later and can give you potential starting running back value here. These are guys that I've especially been trying to target late if I go wide receivers early on, and they are the aforementioned David Montgomery, number 20, number 21, DeAndre Swift, number 22, Tony Pollard, 23, Brian Robinson, 24, Kenneth Walker, 25, Joe Mixon, and 26, Travis Etienne. You may be surprised to see his name in there. So real quickly on those names, I already touched Montgomery. Don't really think I need to go too much more into detail there, other than he still was extremely effective even as the second running back in Detroit in previous seasons. I suspect that will continue in 2025. DeAndre Swift you can see my draft video that I made earlier in the week in which I talk about him more, but very underrated. He gets Ben Johnson back, and we saw what Ben Johnson did with the running back schemes in Detroit. I think Swift is heavily slept on and should have a good fantasy season this year. Tony Pollard has been rising up boards with the injury to Tajay Spears. Another great value that you can get in the 8th round, but really, in my opinion, giving you 6th round value. Brian Robinson, very similarly late 8th round pick, but this is a guy that should still be the starting running back in Washington. I don't really see a world in which Austin Eckler or Jackson Ja'Cory Merritt, I don't exactly remember how to say his name, but he is, I don't really see a world where either of those guys can threaten his value. And Krosky Merritt, I'm sorry. But Krosky, Merritt, and Eckler, I don't think it's really going to be a big threat to Brian Robinson, and he is heavily slept on as a starting running back that is going super late in drafts. Kenneth Walker is in the red for me because a lot of injury concerns, and Charbonnet has been pretty good, so I see this being a little bit more of a timeshare, but I think Walker is still a pretty reliable option that you could go to relative to some of the guys coming up later. Joe Mixon, unfortunately, because of his injuries, kind of drops him on this list, but if he does get healthy, I think he can definitely be in consideration for top 20 or even top 15 running back this year. And then Travis Etienne, I want to bring him up because this is a guy that was he had a really bad season last year, dealt with some injuries, was not very effective. That offensive scheme under Doug Peterson was very weird and really kind of fell apart throughout the season. Now with Liam Cohen, can he replicate a similar resurgence with those running backs, much like Bucky Irving? Can he do that with Travis Etienne? Because they're very similar types of running backs, very good pass catchers. I think it's very possible, and I like the fact that Etienne is going in the 10th round. It doesn't really cost you anything to take a flyer and see what you got. Remember, Etienne is still very young. He's under 25. There's still a lot of opportunity for him to continue to develop in this league, and I think that this is a good opportunity to potentially get a real diamond in the rough late in fantasy drafts that could be very valuable. So as we start to get outside the top 25, kind of go a little bit faster through this video to touch on the other running backs. But the next group that I have are the intriguing rookies. So these are the real names that everybody is trying to get, the real sexy picks in fantasy, trying to get the rookies. And I have them ordered in terms of which ones I would prefer to have. There are a total 5 that I really like outside of the ones mentioned earlier. You have Caleb Johnson from Pittsburgh, R.J. Harvey from Denver, Cam Scatterbo from the Giants, Quinshon Judkins, and Jadon Blue from number 27 to 31. Caleb Johnson, kind of like Travion Henderson, I really like the talent. It's just going to probably take some time for him to get the full workload. So because of that, he falls a little bit lower than these other veterans for me. R.J. Harvey, kind of the same thing. I think R.J. Harvey is going a little bit higher than I would like in general. I think that there's another veteran there that I really like who's going later on draft boards that I think will be great value. We'll talk him in a sec. But both of them, I think they're intriguing rookies to take a look at. Other ones that I think are really good value that you can get 10th round or later on average. So Scatterbo, I think, he's not a natural athlete, and he ran a pretty slow 40 that hurt him in the draft process. But this guy is just has very good natural instincts for the game. And I think more often than not, guys like him who have bounced around the transfer portal, really had to fight for his opportunity to get to the NFL. I just see guys like that finding a way to be successful, and especially on a team like the Giants where there's not a ton of talent. I think that he's going to eventually break out late in the season and will be very useful for fantasy. Quinshon Judkins is kind of a wild card because we don't really know exactly what's going to happen with the legal proceedings of the investigation, but that Browns backfield has a huge void that needs to be filled, and he is the favorite to do that. So this is really going to depend on what happens with the if there's a suspension for him, what his timeline looks like for getting to play, etc. But one of the more underrated values that you can get very late in drafts, if you have space and are able to stash him, I would highly recommend doing that. And then Jadon Blue, he doesn't have the upside of some of these other rookies. He's a 5th round pick. Dallas, though, has a lot of offensive talent, and the guys ahead of him, Javonte Williams and Miles Sanders, have not really stepped up as consistent options throughout their career. So could Jadon Blue take advantage of that? It's very possible, and that puts him inside the top 32 running backs that I'd like to have for me to take the chance on that with this offense. So the next tier here are deeper veterans of interest. So these are guys that I think are underrated, except for this first one, which I'll kind of talk on why. But these are some more veterans that I like that I think could be good value, and especially the fact that they're going late could be useful players. They don't really present a ton of upside, but they are some very good names to keep in mind during this draft process. Number 32, Isaiah Pacheco. Number 33, J.K. Dobbins. 34, Javonte Williams. 35, Jordan Mason. 36, Aaron Jones. 37, Tyrone Tracy. And 38, Jalen Warren. So Isaiah Pacheco, I'm just not a big fan of the Chiefs' backfield for fantasy in general. I think they've got Elijah Mitchell now. that's going to affect some of the touches of these running backs. Kareem Hunt is still there. They drafted a rookie as well who's getting some buzz as well. So because of that, I think this Chiefs backfield, especially you look at the trends of how they have gone over the past couple fantasy seasons, they like to mix in different running backs in their schemes. I would personally be trying to avoid all of them, and especially Pacheco because he's going so early in drafts. He's going on average in the 7th round, but based on the ADP I'm projecting, he's really 10th round value. So he'd be one I'd be trying to avoid, unless he does fall to that range. J.K. Dobbins I do really like, and I talked about him in my draft video, so you could see a little bit more there. But I think that early on, there's going to be a mix of R.J. Harvey and J.K. Dobbins, who was very good with Jim Harbaugh last year. Very underrated running back veteran that you can take pretty late in drafts. Next, Javonte Williams. Kind of similarly with Dobbins, I think Blue I would take the upside on. I've gone a little bit back and forth on this, but I would generally prefer Blue because of the upside that he could give you. But Javonte Williams, I think, could really be an underrated sleeper as well that you can get pretty late in drafts and could very well be the starting running back, especially early in the season for Dallas. Jordan Mason, very similarly, very productive with the 49ers last season when he had opportunities. You don't love the timeshare split with Aaron Jones, who's the next player on this list. But if I had to pick between the two of them, I would go with Jordan Mason, the younger running back, who might be able to give a little more juice and a little more value in the fantasy world. Next, after Aaron Jones, is Tyrone Tracy. So Tyrone Tracy, I think, could kind of be slept on in a way that, he's a great pass-catching running back, former wide receiver, and he could very well be the starting running back for the Giants. But he also dealt with injuries last season. It's pretty slight. We don't really know exactly how that's going to translate to success in the NFL. He's only has 1 year under his belt. I know he's not really a veteran on the scale of these other guys, but I didn't really have a better place to put him. He's very intriguing to me, but I would kind of prefer Scatabo to just see what the rookie can provide, because Tracy to me I think is bordering on potentially a path down his career where he is just a pass-catching option but doesn't really give you a ton of upside otherwise. And Jaylen Warren, another guy who, you kind of know what you're getting with him, change of pace type of situation. I think he will be involved early in Pittsburgh, but I think if you want to bet on one of them eventually taking the backfield and running with it, it would be Caleb Johnson. The next tier of guys. So now we are getting a little bit deeper into the draft. We are going to the handcuff positions. And I love talking about handcuffs because these are some of the guys that could really shoot up draft boards if injuries occur. And they become hot waiver wire targets. You want to make sure that you have some of these guys. And we will start first with the handcuffs that I think you could flex in shallow leagues. These guys are okay now. You could play them if you need to, but if somebody gets injured, they will become very valuable starting level running backs. And in this order, it is Zach Charbonnet, Nick Chubb, Jerome Ford, Jalen Wright, Rashad White, and Roshan Johnson. So Zach Charbonnet, I put him at the top because we've seen him be very productive. I think there's a good chance he could just take over the backfield, even if there is not a Kenneth Walker injury. But then you factor in Kenneth Walker gets injured a lot as well. So that makes this even better. Nick Chubb, Joe Mixon already dealing with injuries. Nick Chubb has the clearest path to me to be the starting running back in Houston, and he's going to have a great opportunity to begin the season if Joe Mixon is injured. So if you draft Mixon, definitely make sure you take Nick Chubb to handcuff him because he could very well be playing early in the season. Jerome Ford, this is a guy that I don't really love necessarily, but he is a good pass-catching option in their backfield. If Judkins is good to go, then Ford drops down on this list, but Ford could really shoot up this list if Judkins is suspended for the first 5 or 6 games to begin the season. Pretty underrated value that you're getting at almost an undrafted price, depending on what happens with Quinshon Judkins. Jalen Wright, I think you can make an argument that this could be Ollie Gordon as well. I have Gordon listed a little bit later on in this video, though. But Jalen Wright is the incumbent running back who's been there, and Achane already dealing with soft tissue injury, could Jalen Wright be able to step in and take that opportunity? And then I bring up Roschon Johnson because I think this is a running back a lot of people have forgotten about in the Bears system, but he fits more of the profile of the Jahmyr Gibbs in that, Lions backfield. If they do decide to replicate a similar two running back room like they did in Detroit, Roschon Johnson could really be an underrated addition that, again, is going undrafted for the most part in the deepest of leagues. I have him projected as potentially 9 rounds higher than his average ADP because I think that there's a real world where if that Detroit offense, or if that Chicago offense replicates what they did in Detroit with 2 successful running backs, Roschon Johnson could really be great value for you. So next are the handcuffs that you can flex in very deep leagues. But again, you're probably not wanting to play these guys, but you should be rostering them if you do have their starting running back. There are a total of 7 of these guys. Kareem Hunt, number 45. Rico Dowdle, number 46. Number 47, Ramondre Stevenson. Number 48, Tank Bigsby. Number 49, Austin Eckler. Number 50, Najee Harris. And number 51, Tajay Spears. Kareem Hunt, I think, is also great value. I honestly would not be surprised if Kareem Hunt actually ends up being better for the majority of the fantasy season than Isaiah Pacheco because he's a guy that's been around, pretty successful last season. Pacheco did not look great when he came back. I know he was injured, recovering from the broken leg, but I think Kareem Hunt will be eating into a lot of his workload. He could have more productive games from time to time. Rico Dowdle, I mentioned with the Panthers. I think there's a good chance, that they bring him over. Despite having Chuba Hubbard, they might be trying to run a 2 running back offense. Maybe he could have value. Again, going undrafted, but could be a great deep league target to look at. Ramondre Stevenson, he's going way too high in my opinion. I'm generally not drafting him at all. This is, I think, more of an appropriate range he should go, especially with TreVeyon Henderson's ascension over the last few weeks. Tank Bigsby, I'm really not a big fan of the other 2 running backs in Jacksonville, Bigsby and Bashul Tutin, because I just don't really know exactly what you're going to be getting with those guys. You already have 3 running backs there, and I think that they would probably prefer to go Travis Etienne of those 3. Bigsby is interesting, though, because he's a little bit more built to be a goal line back that could be given looks for that team there. Austin Eckler has pretty limited upside to me, but if there is an injury to Brian Robinson, who does deal with his fair share of injuries, I think Eckler becomes a lot more valuable than that. Najee Harris, I'm really not drafting unless there's a situation where I have Hampton and I want to have his handcuff. And then Tajay Spears, he would be a lot higher on this list, but unfortunately his high ankle sprain drops him down quite a bit outside the top 50. He's number 51 here. Remains to be seen. If he could get healthy, he could potentially threaten Pollard, but he's been very injury prone throughout his career, so I'm not super optimistic. All right, so this is my favorite group of handcuffs here, starting at number 52. These are the handcuffs with elite upside. These guys you're not going to be wanting to play now, but they should be rostered, especially if you have their elite handcuff. And they're highlighted in blue, much like my top 12, because it's showing you that of your top 12 guys, you should have the handcuff on their team. And that is Isaac Guerendo, Will Shipley, Tyler Algier, Ray Davis, Braylon Allen, Trey Benson, Bashul Tutin, Blake Corum, Marshawn Lloyd, DJ Giddens, and Keaton Mitchell. So all of these guys to me are players that should be rostered. The ones that I really like up at the top are Guerendo, Shipley, and Algier, because those are some of the best running backs up there at the top. You've got the handcuff to Christian McCaffrey, you got the handcuff to Saquon Barkley, and the handcuff to Bijan Robinson. All those guys are going undrafted, but if you own Saquon Barkley, you want to make sure you have Will Shipley because he's looked good so far in the preseason. And I think that they want to make, if anything happens to Saquon, I think he can definitely be very successful in that offense. Same with Guerendo. We've seen him be successful already last season when McCaffrey went down for the second time. And then Algier, we've also already seen effective. So All three of those guys undrafted, but should be rostered at all costs, in my opinions, by those owners of the starting running backs. And then the other guys are just all names of guys that I have seen be productive, or I think could be productive if given the opportunity due to an injury. So because of that, all these guys round out my top 62 as names that I'm very intrigued in as handcuffs. So I will get into a little bit more on handcuffs as we go through the season, but you should be owning the backup running back to your elite running backs in all your leagues. And I would personally recommend, waiting to hold your kicker, so that way, if you drafted Saquon number 1 overall, I would hold Will Shipley, just in case of an injury, because, we saw that happen with CMC and Jordan Mason went from somewhere in this list, somewhere probably in the top 52 to 62, like I have here, or lower from some consensus, to shooting up into top 12 consideration. All right, this next group of guys are emergency PPR streamers only. So these guys are, pass-catching running backs that really are just of value if you have a lot of bye weeks and you want to pick somebody up in a full PPR league who could potentially give you some points to just survive. Not guys that really have a ton of upside because they don't really deviate from this role. Justice Hill, number 63. 64, Jaleel McLaughlin. 65, Samaje Perine. And 66, Ty Johnson of the Buffalo Bills. So all four of these guys, they could give you some good value, as I mentioned, if there's a PPR situation, if you're just looking for somebody to keep you afloat. Justice Hill, to me, I think has the most upside of this group because we've seen him be very good, even with Derrick Henry, if he catches a long touchdown pass. But I am a little bit skeptical and would kind of prefer to have Keaton Mitchell because I believe that that's actually the guy that would more likely replicate Derrick Henry. If Henry were to get injured for whatever reason, then I think Mitchell would be the one that would be getting the early work and the majority of running back touches. But then third down, receiving options would be going to Justice Hill. And the last group to me are other interesting names to mention. So these are all guys that I think are interesting and enough to round out my top 75, but not quite names that I would really categorize as something that I would want to take higher. So not looking to draft these guys, but monitoring situations because I think they could be relevant. Ollie Gordon, as I mentioned, this is a guy that you could honestly argue should be flipped with the other Miami running back, Jalen Wright, because if Achane actually stays injured, then there's a chance that he could work his way in. He was a previously highly rated running back who kind of fell in the draft process during his most recent college season, and as a result, it kind of hurt his stock. But he's very talented, and I think this Miami situation could be good for him should they deal with injuries. Dylan Sampson, very similarly with Cleveland. If Judkins is not able to go, I think this guy does have some upside potentially as Ford's backup should Jerome Ford not be very effective with his touches. So something to monitor there. Kyle Monangai from the Chicago Bears. He's a 7th round pick. So, there's an argument that, maybe he could work his way into the system, kind of replace Swift and Roshan Johnson, who's been there. But that's asking a lot for a 7th round pick. So he's a name I'm interested in, but only 69 on my list. Woody Marks, number 70, very similarly, because of the Joe Mixon situation, Marks could potentially get involved. But right now it's looking like it's more likely going to be Nick Chubb and Dameon Pierce, who didn't quite make my list. But this is a rookie that you want to keep an eye on because I think he could be very good, potentially. Krosky Merritt of Washington. I already mentioned him a little bit earlier. He's getting a lot of buzz in camp, but I think the best case scenario for him is to potentially get Austin Eckler's role, but he's not going to be getting the starting role. I would highly doubt that. Devin Neal of New Orleans. This one could really shoot high on my list if Kamara were to either get shut down for the season because they're trying to preserve his health, or if they trade him. Both of which I think are very high possibilities. Devin Neal, I think, is the name that's a little more interesting to me than Kendre Miller because he is a rookie, and I think Neal could get the opportunity should they decide that they're just going to tank and trade Alvin Kamara away or something to that effect. Next is Raheem Mostert. He's been around for quite a while, but he is, believe it or not, the second running back behind Ashton Genty in Las Vegas. I think more than likely if Genty were to go down, let's hope that doesn't happen, but it would probably be more of a committee, but I think Mostert would probably be leading that group. Elijah Mitchell, I mentioned him earlier. He could have relevance in Kansas City. He was pretty good in San Francisco before his injuries last year. I think that backfield is going to be a bit crazy, and Mitchell will get involved from time to time. And then Audric Estime, I mentioned his name as well because that's another name Denver, I think, will incorporate from time to time in what's expected to be a running back by committee and for the Broncos as well. All right. So if you made it through this video, thank you so much for watching all this. This was 75 running backs of work put together to help you with your fantasy football rosters this season and your drafts coming up soon. As always, if you have any questions, please comment them in the video. Subscribe to the channel. Ask any questions that you got, and we will continue doing mock drafts over the next week. We'll kind of focus on different sizes of leagues, different settings and formats. And we'll also do our wide receiver strategy to close out all the positions. So stay tuned for that, and I hope to see you guys next time. Have a great weekend. Bye.